Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session that is really focusing on amplifying leadership through solidarity, migrant voices shaping responsible business practices. I'm really happy to see so many of you here Friday morning, 9 a.m. Congratulations on having made it through all the days of the Responsible Business Forum, and hope today is a good day too, and we can wrap up in style. Over the 3 days here, we've heard a lot of talk about how human rights due diligence and worker voice tools are driving change in terms of improving human rights for the workforce and the supply chain and bringing about better business practices. But at the same time, we've also heard that migrant workers in particular are still not really seen nor heard in these processes, and they're hard to consult with, and their rights are not respected quite the same way as national workforce. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about why that is, but maybe I can just race you through some of the barriers so that we have a fresh reminder as to why we still have to focus so much on talking about migrant workers, their voice, their representation, and how we can amplify that. So we know that migrant workers are 3 times as likely to end up in situations of forced labor and labor trafficking in comparison to national workforce, and that's due to multiple reasons. They tend to be deeper in the supply chain, so they're not necessarily in your tier 1 suppliers, but you have to go into harder to find places to find them. They are rarely allowed to either join trade unions or have representative roles in trade unions when they can join them. They are almost always barred from any kind of local political engagement, so that's to have kind of local political parties represent them. There are usually no pathways to permanent residency or citizenship, and immigration enforcement and deportation is something that is relatively frequently dangled as a threat to drive kind of compliance. There are obviously, of course, language barriers, there are cultural barriers, there are practices that separate them from the mainstream workforce and population that kind of allows them to be othered in a way. So with all of this, we have 3 practitioners here with us today who will be talking you through a little bit about the work that they are doing in trying to amplify migrant worker voices in their daily lives, in their processes, in their business, to ensure that human rights are respected and migrant workers have a say. And some of the questions that we'll be addressing include: how are we trying to address that lack of leadership roles for migrant workers in decision making? And what could or what do participatory mechanisms look like? And how do we understand the structural barriers that continue to restrict migrant workers from effectively participating in labor rights conversations, and how can we break them down? So I have with me today, we tried to look at sort of 3 layers of migrant worker engagement. So I have on my left, I have Jason Quizon, who is a seasoned Filipino migrant worker and one of the leaders of the Global Migrant Worker Network, current migrant worker in Qatar, but also a community organizer, a grassroots mobilizer, who in his daily life works with migrant workers, tries to meet their issues, tries to find solutions. Further to the left, I have Baria, who's a dedicated labor rights advocate and former migrant worker herself, who has actively organized and campaigned for the rights of women migrant workers since 2010. She currently serves as the program officer for the Asia region with the International Domestic Workers Federation, which is a global federation representing over 669,000 domestic workers in more than 69 countries. And so Baria can really look at the issue a little bit more from the formalized organizing union perspective. But at the same time, we know that domestic workers, of course, are regularly still left outside of labor law, so there are those challenges between the kind of formality and informality there. And then on my right, we have Christian Chandran, who is a global engagement lead with Amazon Human Rights and Social Impact Team, with over 20 years of experience focusing on sustainable supply chains, ethical sourcing, so on. And prior to Amazon, he was also with Inditex and KPMG, so has sort of wide industry experience on this topic. And of course, from Christian, we hope to hear a little bit about what is the private sector doing in trying to amplify worker voices and trying to really engage with the migrant workers found in their supply chains. So with that, I think, so the format of the panel, I hope to pose a few questions to the panelists so that they can introduce their topics and what they're working on and some of the barriers that they see, and then reserve a good 30 minutes or so for the audience to ask questions and engage, and so we can have a bit more of an open dialogue on this. But Jason, I'll start with you, and really would love to just hear you reflect a little bit about your work and your daily experiences in Qatar, especially through your kind of role through the Global Migrant Worker Network and as a community organizer. So if you can tell us about some of the issues you're involved with, what are the challenges and benefits, and also kind of reflect a bit on that informality of your organizing because of the structural barriers, and you know, how are you then having a dialogue versus the state or the employers?
Thank you very much, Pepe. First of all, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I was saying good afternoon because of the time difference. But thank you very much for having me here. I've been working in the Middle East for the whole of my professional career. I started working in Saudi Arabia around 2003. So that gives me like 22 years working in the Middle East. So our group was formed a few years back during the last presidential election of the Philippines, because we are a group pushing for good governance. After the election was finished, the group was at a crossroad where do we want to have the group stay as it is or just let it go? But then we started receiving some messages because during the time also pandemic has hit. So we got some messages from the community asking for some help. And the problem is we are in Qatar. And the Middle East countries, you really don't have any formal way of organizing groups and getting the groups legally recognized. So the group existed ad hoc, and every time that we receive some cry for help, we just talk to the group, ask in the group if there is somebody who could give some help, and we do it. So that's where it started, and since then we have been able to help some of the people from the community, not only from the Filipino community, but also some other nationalities we were able to help. And all the things that we do is coming out, the funding is coming from our own pockets. By the way, I'm working as an engineer. And most of the people that we are helping are from the service sector, like the domestic workers. We have baristas coming from cafes, some construction workers as well. And most of these people are the people who were affected by the 2022 World Cup. It was like initially good at the beginning, but at the last stage, projects are starting to close. Company are closing, and really they don't have any mechanism on their own self what to do to get their payments, their salaries, their separation pay. A lot of these people, especially from Nepal and some from Philippines, they just went home without getting these benefits. But Qatar government did some adjustments because they were placed on a spotlight. They did some adjustments on their part. They put a lot of legal courts. From one legal court, we have now 5 legal courts who's hearing labor complaints. So that's one thing. Now, daily, we can say that we cannot really go out in the open to really, push through with migrant workers' complaints and all. What we do mostly is advise our friends and colleagues who have some problems on what to do. I'm just very lucky that I am working with a good company that really, I'm getting fair treatment. But sadly, most of the companies that are doing the not so fair practices are the small companies, and also the companies that are close to bankruptcy. So when this happens, it's either the worker just, get what is very little that's left with what the company can offer and go home and move on with their lives. But those rights are not the same rights as the one we have back home, so that like we can go and complain and go to the police straight. No, we cannot do that, because once you do that and the company is like well connected or maybe influential in this country of destination, you just go and what you call this, and just move on and just forget about it. So in our case, we just do what little things we can do. We cannot even do a formal meeting like organize and put in public what we want to convey. Instead, we just arrange some usually like birthday parties and like that, or some sports sports activities. And through those informal gatherings, we are able to say what we want to say. We are able to talk about topics that we cannot really talk in public. In Qatar, you can only, there are around 20 people who organize and then talk about a political or some issues regarding some businesses. That is already tagged as an illegal assembly. So just imagine if you just happen to be in a place and somebody overhears you and complain about you, you're already marked. So we have to really be careful in order for us to do what we want. Nobody's paying us. It's just that the community needs the services, or I mean, even if we are not formally recognized, still the need is there to help the migrant community. So we do what we can from our own capacity, just to help the people that really needs our help. And little by little, the government is listening to us. Last year, we really had some communications with them because of what we did during the pandemic. So hopefully that continues. Thank you, Pepe.
Thanks, Jason. And I think that point about a lot of the problems are arising in really the small companies or the companies on the verge of bankruptcy, at which point, of course, sort of having mandatory HRDD isn't really going to solve the problems that the migrant workers are facing. And so then that begs the question of how does this kind of community organizing and more structural shift towards protecting migrant workers bring about some change. But thank you, and I'll come back to you with some other questions, but over to Baria for now. So Baria, with your experience grounded in both personal and collective struggle, what would be some of the barriers that stop migrant workers from engaging with existing worker rights mechanisms such as trade union negotiations and labor dispute facilitations? And also, if you could talk a little bit about when you do organize amongst the domestic workers in particular, what you see being the change when they feel that they are part of a group and when they're being heard.
Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Baria. As already introduced by Pepe, I'm former migrant workers in Malaysia. So that's how the experience, the personal experience bring me until now, working with the migrant domestic worker in Asia country. So just a little bit to touch about the IDWF. So we are a global federation where represent more than 700,000 domestic worker, including migrant domestic worker in Asia, Middle East, Europe, Latin America, USA, and the Caribbean. So within the role that we believe is we're looking at the organizing of people, organizing of domestic worker, migrant domestic worker, and how we try to shape the leadership of those vulnerable group to be also leading their voice, their demands to claim back their right as a domestic worker. This is just for a little bit introduction, but to give you also like a kick of sense how the situation of domestic worker, why it's become different with other sector like in manufacture and plantation, because the nature of the living of domestic worker is very remote. They are staying under the house of the employer, the private employer, and I guess some of you also hire domestic worker here. So this is how the nature is becoming more struggle when we are talking about organizing migrant domestic worker and talking about the barriers, the systemic migration system that we had, where not allowing migrant domestic worker to have freedom even to choose the job because they have to go through the system of recruitment and business model through the agency recruitment, where there are many excessive agency being charged for domestic worker, many self-certification of document, passport, contract, and even a case of substitution contract, meaning to say many of contract that set up by a recruitment agency is telling to not allow domestic worker even to have right to communication within their family and their community. So this is how the structure barriers that starting and begin within the domestic worker issue. And in addition, I think the same other country, mostly in Asia, the labor law reform is not really recognized and protect migrant domestic workers. So we are excluded from even like national minimum wage. We are also excluded from working hours. We are also excluded even from right to weekly day off. Even though there are certain movements that we from our belief that organizing domestic worker and building leadership is the core, where we are open up a safe space. Because I think when we are talking about organizing migrant domestic worker, the first enter we are looking at how could be the space is being safe for them to meet, to have an exchange about their right, their situation, and as well as how they are starting to think about capacity building, empower themselves about the labor right, about the human right, and this how the organizing we starting about within our affiliate in Malaysia, for example, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, where some of them are able to register formally as union, but some other country, like let's say the case of Malaysia, the government is not yet allowing migrants to register and to have their union. Nevertheless, through this organizing tactic, safe building space, capacity building, they are starting to think about what should be the right to be claimed as an association, as a community-led organization by migrant domestic workers. So they are starting within to addressing the opportunity, whether through the network with trade union in Malaysia, for example, through the NGO, on how to starting a pathway to connect in such of social dialogue with the government. So even though still there are some barriers in making how this domestic worker more recognized, like register in the destination country, but we believe that there are already many best practices that we achieve where social dialogue has been open and the group has been recognized by the government of destination country. They are able to raise in the process of labor law reform, social security, and in terms of even access to remedy within the migrant domestic worker themselves. Nevertheless, the support within the trade union around is also one of the other key how this room are becoming possible for migrant domestic worker in destination country. So we claim unpaid salary, we claim excessive fee agency from the recruitment agency, and we now starting campaigning for our labor right as migrant domestic worker. And I have to say, like, we're trying to be more open to the public because this is the way how we can gain more support in terms of claiming the right for domestic worker. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Baria. And I think it is really interesting. It is that sort of space, as you say, with finding first the trust and the space to gather, and safe space and safe communication, but then finding the pathways of communication. How do you link to the kind of ecosystem of representation? Maybe there are other unions who can take on cases. Maybe there are NGOs that you can work with. And so how you then are able to connect the migrant workers, the domestic workers into that broader representation. So that sounds really good, but I'll get back to you because I want to move on to Christian next. So Christian, I mean, Amazon has been working for a long time with their supply chains, trying to bring out some human rights due diligence and worker representation in the processes. So can you talk about some of the barriers that Amazon has encountered over the years trying to elevate migrant workers' access to remedy or confidential grievance processes within its supply chain?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel, especially along with Jason and Barry as well. I think before I kind of go into the barriers question, just want to give you a kind of a short brief about how we kind of approach this and give a background about what are the mechanisms that we have in place to ensure that we kind of lay a foundation for the right to representation when we kind of look into policies and practices. In general, I think Amazon, we are committed to kind of ensure and respect and international recognized human rights, international standards and framework, especially put out by the United Nations as well as the ILO. And in that process, to kind of not just put things as policies, but also put as practices, we've seen 4 major focus areas that's been critical to our work. The first one is about having the right human rights due diligence approach. We have a central team focusing on developing human rights due diligence across the different companies within Amazon. And one of the things that we ensure is that we recognize that certain people could be more vulnerable than others and could be exposed to potential exploitation. So we want to ensure that those vulnerable groups are particularly covered. We want to ensure that we are including domestic and foreign migrant workers, contract agency and temporary workers, refugees, asylum seekers, ethnic minorities, as well as displaced persons, young and student workers, indigenous people, women and children. So we want to ensure that our risk models cover all of that. The second thing which we want to focus on is the whole idea around principles in supporting policies. So we have the Amazon Global Human Rights Principles, which gets updated on a regular basis. The last update was in 2025, January, which ensures that we kind of ensure that the realities in the field gets reflected in each of these policies. We also have the supply chain standards, which applies to all our suppliers and persons providing and manufacturing goods and services to Amazon. So we ensure that that also is updated, and we kind of ensure that that process includes certain specific areas. For example, we recently added several new standards and kind of updated language around protections for workers with disabilities, pregnancy-related accommodations, workers' freedom to terminate employment without penalty, as well as environmental justice provisions. The third thing is our work with the suppliers to promote responsible recruitment as well as safe migration practices. Now that covers basically the kind of engagement that we have with our suppliers, where we provide specialized trainings, remediation support, risk mitigation toolkits, as well as we want to ensure that there is transparent data analysis and reporting, as well as the kind of partnerships that we have. The last one, and that's where I'm going to touch upon the barriers, is to ensure that we provide workers access to effective grievance mechanisms and remediation. So we want to ensure that all our workers as well as employees, contractors have access to the right grievance mechanisms. We have an Amazon ethics line, we have a web-based complaints form, as well as we have worker voice mechanisms in place in different geographies, which is a combination of tech solutions. I think we talked about it a lot during this session as well, but also have traditional solutions like hotlines, helplines, and interactions with workers at the field level. Coming to the barriers specifically, and that's where probably I'll kind of touch upon a few things. We recognize clearly that grievance mechanisms are essential to supporting opportunities for every person across our value chain. They help actually to provide the right worker insights, which influences our programming. It also helps to resolve worker issues quickly. It helps suppliers to identify and address issues as well. But we also know and recognize that all grievance mechanisms are not created equally. And technologies that try to capture workers' voice can quickly build trust, as well as they can also lose trust very quickly. So we want to ensure that that's covered. So in that context, the 3 barriers which we specifically have identified and we've tried to work on it is, first, we've noticed that worker voice mechanisms need to be designed with workers in mind. We assume that it's going to be, but it may not be always. So we always see third-party mechanisms created by global brands or suppliers. They are implementing the mechanisms, but we're not sure if workers will use them. So for them to be truly effective, workers need to trust them. I think this is the tone that we have seen across different sessions during this forum as well. So that's one important part. The second part, which has been challenging, which has been a barrier, is how to balance scalability and investing in local solutions. We have a lot of digital technologies which help to scale. We know that they kind of exist. They offer resources and tools for suppliers. But we also found that if worker voice mechanisms need to be localized to fit the worker demographic, We need to provide local language access, the method in which they will reach out to these helplines, and we also need to see that workers should be able to see the change that actually has been done. So we have some examples like the helpline that we work with closely in Bangladesh, Amadir Kota. It's a great example of how this can be looked into from a localization perspective. The third one, and probably I'll kind of close it there, is the greater risk of a lot of companies duplicating efforts. And that's where the need for collaboration kind of comes in. We don't want to confuse workers and suppliers with too many mechanisms. So for that purpose, we want to ensure that we don't want to work in silo. So we have, Madhur Kota is a great example, but we also seen several other industry collaborations like RBA Voices. We also seen Amfree Speak for Change and several other mechanisms which are helpful in addressing the duplication, addressing the cluttering of worker voice mechanisms in the field. I'll pause there. Those are the barriers that we have recognized, and we want to ensure that we actively address them.
Thanks, Christian. And I think it is that very question around, and specifically for Amazon, but scalability versus then having something that's localized and feels trusted within the specific geographical area where it's working. And maybe you can talk about that a little bit more in the next step, how you also work with civil society and NGOs sometimes to kind of bring that localized flavor into the exchange. Good. So back to Jason. So your last 5 minutes, and maybe you can be a little bit forward-looking in terms of where do we go from here. So you've told us about how you kind of are already informally recognized by your peers, by migrant workers in Qatar, for example, but it's still quite difficult to organize. You can't really be publicly be seen representing, but you have had some exchanges with the government, you mentioned, and I remember that you also said that with regards to consular officials, that's quite helpful. So, what are some of the structures that exist already that can help your work, and how could that be strengthened further to support your fundraising ability or regular dialogue with governments, with other representatives? How do you see getting into that space?
The pandemic has really opened the eyes of the government that it's the grassroots communities that are the really ones who are helping the community from the perspective of the migrant workers, because the government doesn't really have the reach to know exactly what these people needs. So what they did last year and earlier this year, they engaged us into a dialogue. Like they gave us some trainings on the measures that the government is doing, different branches of the government. They gave us a training on how to file a case, how does the Ministry of Labor is doing their updating of the system. Now, one of the things that really we brought up, for example, is the switching of contracts. So during the course of this exchange a few months ago, Qatari government already implemented the online verification of contracts, which is a win for us. So for newcomers right now being employed in Qatar, there is an online prompt for you to check your contract if it's the same that you signed from the origin country. So it's these small things that carries us forward. So we also have systems now on how to file cases online, even by using just SMS. But a lot of the people who needs this, especially from the service community, the domestic workers, they are really not that techy in order to, access these services. So the thing that the group is doing is actually trying to bridge that gap and provide like sort of ad hoc trainings to these people who needs it, and just go to them one by one. If they want to file a case, sometimes it's not really the process of filing the case that's difficult for them. It's the fear that the employer will get back at them if they file the case. So that's one thing also. It's psychological in some nature. So for us, it's really just, we're just trying to do the little things that we do, and hopefully the government notices it and then just chooses to collaborate with us. With regards to the funding, again, the funding from our group is just coming from the pocket of the members, especially from us who are the heads of the organization. And we really cannot get funding directly, openly from people outside the, the organization, because we're not legally recognized. They can file some cases against us if we do that. So we're really limited on how we do the work that we do. So in cases that we need to really need some funds, we just get creative. So we organize like bowling events, like badminton events, and the excess that we get money from that, it's the one we use to support the people that really needs the help that we can get. So that's it, Pepe. Anything else?
No, thank you. And I think when I listen to you, I mean, the thought that comes across very clearly is that because migrant worker issues can be sometimes so specific, maybe this kind of broad-based organizing, which looks at the community rather than a sector where a person is working, is more meaningful, because you're able to meet the migrant workers, and they tend to have sector-wide issues, like regardless of which sector you're working with, that fear of retaliation by your employer is always there, right? Because immigration law can always be applied to you as a migrant worker.
Yes, that's one of the limitations that we face, and that's one of the biggest factor that prevents migrant workers from filing cases. And yeah, it's that fear itself. We have to really tell the migrant workers that you are protected one way or another if you do it. But sadly, what's written in the law is not really translated into practice. There are still workarounds on how employers can get back at these people who file the cases. So just to reiterate again, before, if you file a case like you did not get your salary, most of the employers can file back like absconding case against you. So when you go to the police to file the case, the police will catch you and say, there's an open case against you. But those are one of the things that we opened up to the Qatar government. And right now, if a person files a case against a company, it's already linked to the other sector of the government that if the employer files a case, it's flagged, so he cannot anymore file a case. So that's one of the good development that we had this year. So that's one thing. So yeah, it's messy psychological. So even if that's in place, again, some employers still find a way to really intimidate or maybe force laborers not to do it.
But I mean, it does sound like you're getting your voices heard. So, I mean, there is change. Anyhow, sounds positive.
Yeah, it is.
And then, Baria, over to you. So maybe a little bit more on the experience in terms of how is the change that you're driving and those linkages with the more formal representation of trade unions. So can you share maybe some examples of how migrant workers or how domestic workers are currently able to represent their interest in policy conversations or vis-a-vis the government or negotiations with decent work with employers, or how you are working also looking at recruitment agencies?
Too many questions at once, but I will try to touch a few of them. When the question is about how we build a pathway that you questioned just now, how we claim the representation of the migrant domestic worker themselves. Maybe just few an example from different countries, because this also depend on how the context country level will be. For let's say in Hong Kong, when the migrant domestic worker register, they are able to at least having a regular social dialogue with the government and employer in relation to the wage increasement, wage increasement is not happen in other country. So these are something pathway when we are looking really migrant domestic worker have been recognized, their representation for freedom of association and collective bargaining. But then in the context of different countries, like for example, Malaysia, how we are dealing and how we are fighting even within the employer is also a big question, because for sure in the inside of the house, there will be like unequal power relationship between employers and the domestic worker, and domestic worker stay long inside of the house. So these are something that we will look at some changes in terms of maybe one I like to touch in terms of access to remedy for migrant domestic workers. So do not expect that domestic worker will access like digital apps that government establish, or might be calling directly the police office or labor department. This is something rarely happen. Why? Because even they do not have access regularly to call to people, to family, to the community. So this how the establishment of building, community engagement, organic organizing is happen. So those domestic worker will be connect each other in one of the fancy apartment or condominium. They are meet during they are drop the children, or they are meet they are doing grocery shopping. So this how we are saying about organic organizing really comes through the mouth of the domestic worker one by one. So it's not that domestic worker in Malaysia can gather in the one park and we met them, we deliver leaflet. This is a different case what we had like in Hong Kong. So the change that we had is so far now they are starting moving that access for domestic worker to the trust community building is happening. The numbers of domestic worker come asking for the help, and this is how the domestic worker association are trying to find pathway to connect with the local trade union and NGO and bring the case to the labor department. Nevertheless, the representation of the domestic worker who are not registered, this is remaining challenge as how Qatar experience as well. So if you want to go to the court and challenge your employer, you have to come with the local trade union. And this is how we say trust building and solidarity within the trade union themselves are also very important. This is the one. And the second one, in terms of social dialogue within the government, this is also, I think, something we've seen that Malaysia government right now try to open up the spaces for the any representation of migrant workers. So not only domestic worker, but as well as different migrant worker in different sector. And I think this also reminding me from Joseph's work, when the pandemic is happened, there are many exposure about forced labor happening within the sector, and one is missed is about exposure around forced labor in domestic workers. So this is how our chance to take up starting the campaign from weekly day off campaign in Malaysia, starting being heard, and the government are open up along with the trade union in Malaysia to start looking at even like the term of domestic servant to be changed to the domestic employee, even though the implementation is remaining challenge as well, and the fundamental right also needs something further to discuss with the government. And yeah, related to the employment agency, I think when talking about in equal power, this is also happen how the employment agency, when they violate the right of the domestic worker, we cannot just immediate coming to the office of the employment agency, because there will be more pressure and more intimidation by the recruitment agency. So what the way we go is we mostly collect all this evidence on, like, let's say excessive agency or contract falsification, like they are put in the contract right to not join union. This is something that we can send the claim to the government. But in certain country, I think the possibility of challenge the recruitment agency is more open. Like in Hong Kong, they have regulation where recruitment agency cannot charge more than 10% of salary of domestic worker, this is not happen in the case of Malaysia and Singapore. Singapore government allow for 2 months salary charge. So this is something that best practice and good practice we want to share along the Asia countries when we are talking about the right of migrant domestic worker. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Baria. And I think you're really bringing home the fact that there's nothing beating collective bargaining. And you see that in Hong Kong, which is the only country that has provided wage hikes to domestic workers where they can actually represent themselves. But also what I find interesting, and this is something that maybe we can also reflect, Christian, with you a little bit, but it is that particularly when you have hotlines or apps through which you can file complaints, how do you build the trust to engage with that mechanism? And you can't just sort of put out a hotline and say, well, you haven't called, so you can't have problems. I mean, you really have to work with the community, create that trust, and also ensure that should you file a complaint, we will support you, we will walk you through this process, right? So that a person is not alone, because the power imbalances are so huge that is a barrier in itself. Thanks. So Christian, back to you. And I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more exactly on the kind of that scale versus the localization, how you are able to work with civil society as well to try to kind of build a little bit of that trust and build drive engagement in grievance mechanisms, for example.
Totally. I think, I would kind of address civil society as well as the whole idea of worker representation at three different levels. The example that I kind of started sharing earlier around, the grievance mechanism around Mother Kota in Bangladesh, for example, I think while we have tried and tested as a company different tools, tech tools, hybrid tools, we found that one of the most effective ways of kind of worker representation, through civil society organizations is when you have a local organization which workers can trust. So this is a model where there is a local organization which is in the community where workers can reach out, of course, supported by multiple brands on the other side. But then the first contact is that local civil society organization. And using that as a success example, we are actually extending that to a few more regions. There is 2 more regions which is already being implemented right now, and then extending to another 3 regions we're looking at, in 2026 as well. So that's one, I would say, specific level of worker representation through civil society organizations. We also see value in a couple of other ways which I wanted to share. For example, how we ensure that we kind of include or enable worker voice in the remedy itself. The example that we have is around we had a independent audit conducted in Saudi Arabia, and we found that there are several violations, ranging from recruitment fees paid by migrant workers, absence of grievance mechanism, and also issues with worker accommodations. And external organizations also raised some similar challenges there. We started with an implementation plan which included, reimbursing, worker fees over $2 million US, but also, looking at preventive mechanisms and working with, workers directly as well as through organizations. What I wanted to highlight is that has now led to a proactive approach on identifying ethical recruitment agencies, and that cannot happen without workers' support. So as we speak, there are teams, which are kind of proactively focusing on identifying ethical recruitment agencies and work with them, and also have them introduced to our suppliers so that the suppliers start engaging with them, understanding what problems they have. Are they needing some resources? Do they need to build some capabilities? How do we reach out to workers? So all that activity helps as well. And we cannot do that without both direct access to workers as well as civil society organizations. The third thing which I wanted to highlight before I probably close is that how we also engage with macro level organizations. So one level is civil society organizations, direct engagement with workers. We also need engagements with macro level organizations, where we are able to kind of understand the realities of the field. For example, we do have a partnership with IOM as well, at focusing on mapping labor migration processes across different corridors, and the idea of capacity building, with supply chain partners, and also trying to find ways to engage, the government. Another partnership that we have is with JP Mirai in Japan. It's a JICA partnered initiative which specifically tries to identify how can we change things, in the field, because we are talking about receiving countries. I mean, everybody understands here about the whole network of migration and the network of recruitment. So we have sending countries, we have receiving countries, we have several networks in between. So how do we engage at different levels? There were some positive examples shared about Philippines during this forum as well, where it kind of have worked in terms of direct engagement, but still there are several challenges to fix. So those kind of partnerships help us to find ways to engage with governments, as well as find ways to engage in the recruitment corridors, as well as find ways to engage with organizations which represent workers in the field. So in short, we cannot do this alone. So we need to have these right partnerships at different levels to ensure workers get represented into the policies and practices that we are, putting in place.
Thanks. And thanks for also reminding us of the structural level of engagement. And I think particularly with ethical recruitment, what we all know is that you can't you can maybe, but the remedy of repayment of recruitment fees is like a leaking bucket, right? I mean, every time you look for recruitment fees and costs amongst the other migrant worker force, you will find them. And so to really start changing the way that recruitment happens, you have to have those macro level conversations as well. And I hope your search for ethical recruitment agencies is going very well, and you found lots of partners to work
A
with.
year ago, we probably would say one. I think we can say more numbers now. So I'm sure it's going to be increasing. And I also see a lot of other companies wanting to do this. We had a session on ethical, marketplace for ethical recruitment in this forum as well. So I think there's a lot of traction and there's a lot of effort globally to come together to find, solutions and avoid duplication.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, and we can go a little bit over time given that we started late, so I'd love to open it up for questions from the audience or remarks or thoughts. So yeah, I see, okay, so we have let's start here and then we go to the gentleman with the blue jacket and then, yeah, please.
Good morning. My name is Raji. I work for the Middle East Center for Training and Development based in Dubai. So a bit of the points that I want to actually raise over here, I think Jason can connect to it as well as the question is forwarded to Ms. Baria. I'm very well aware of the work that IDWF does in the GCC too. And just as the few of the challenges that you have mentioned with in related to domestic workers, I guess UAE in 2017 has put out some beautiful reforms on paper at least. They have put out the Tadbir system out there, which just to give it in a short form would be a one-stop shop for the employers and the employees. With this system in place, has Ms. Baria, have you experienced the impact or have you seen an increased number of cases? Because once the system has actually been out, more than the legal disputes that I've seen an issue with the recruitment where because of the increased costs, these so-called employers take in these domestic workers on visiting visas. And taking a domestic worker on a visit visa means that no guaranteed end-of-service benefits, no guaranteed benefits as per the labor laws too. So just to if you could highlight anything on this matter, please.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Vishal. I'm based in Nepal. I represent Migration Drishti organization based in Nepal, which is providing independent monitoring services, especially on ethical recruitment. So my question is related to supply chain, like when the accessible grievance mechanism that provided by the brands and companies in the supply chain, that when the worker is contacted to the companies, their information came to the employer and they got terminated and intimidation and threats. So when the audits and the assessment comes through the supply chain, then there is a worker already been terminated and there is no workers because of intimidation and threat. So they have been already run away, maybe skipped the company's employment. So what are the measures to assess that that kind of retaliation from the employers, and what reintegration support for the first level victim can be launched by any of the stakeholders within the supply chain? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gladys. I'm working in a dialogue program, COVID program in supply chain. So my question is, so when the country which is legally allowed to receive agency fee, how can a company who receive labor abort can ensure there's no human rights violations during the recruitment process? And the second thing is, when we are naming those recruiting agency, actually they're also a profit-making company. So how can we help them, or how can they ensure there's no human rights violations in the recruiting process? Just like what we also heard about from the panelists about the whole recruitment process, about the agency fee. Actually, what we face in our work is those migrant workers from Vietnam working in a factory in Taiwan. They work for the whole year, just to pay back the recruitment fee from their Vietnam recruiting agents. So we need some help here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll start with this and then we'll take one more round of questions. But maybe, so starting off with Reggie's question. So over to you, Baria, really about whether you see increased complaints now that there's this one-stop shop coming up in the UAE.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. I might not be able to really go deeper in terms of the new system that has been developed on the one-stop system that UAE have. But I might be raised in the context of how the recent situation of the migrant domestic worker in relevant of the access to remedy of or receiving complaint, because we have a few affiliates in UAE, including in the Middle East country, which is, I think, the more complaint that mostly receive is through the community building that we had, our affiliate had. It's also might be like similar, like in the context of Malaysia, even though there are new system has been established by the government, it's unlikely, it's very much difficult for domestic worker to go through. It's not only because barriers in terms of the access, but also some languages barriers, and as well as administrative process is mostly also required within the system that has been developed. But if the question might be, I can say, is the numbers of case of migrant domestic worker are currently still, I can say, like many and increased number within the affiliate that providing service for migrant domestic worker there. Maybe I cannot so much deep, but Josan, if you have some more to add in this system, I also welcome to you.
Yeah, for the migrant, for the domestic workers, there are lots of cases that have been filed now in Qatar specifically, and the problem is, even if we get the results, the compensation or the carrying out of the verdict is really not that pushed through. Like we have some cases where they already got the verdict for like a year and still they didn't get the compensation. So there's really a lot of it's a really hard decision for the domestic worker is to stay there and wait for her to get the money, or just go home and just go about it. Right now, we have like 170 mostly domestic workers in the Philippine shelter. They are either runaways or they are already terminated and just waiting to go home. So it's one of those things. The system allowed us to really file cases, but then do we really get the result that we require from the government or from the employees to really pay or compensate the domestic worker? I think one of the things that we should focus right now is the implementation of these laws, and then to really bring about the objective of this and really help the domestic workers or anybody who filed the case, which are really the vulnerable.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Then we had Vishal's question, which I think really gets to the heart of the root problem of why migrant workers are so vulnerable. But so, and this, I think anyone can come in if you have some wise words to share. But so really, how do you address the fact that there is retaliation? And often that results in contract termination, which then particularly, I think in Malaysia and in the Gulf, would result in having to leave the country, and justice is rarely accessible once you returned home.
Yeah, I can kind of cover, from probably a company perspective. So one of the challenges that we have seen with supplier-led grievance mechanisms is that the workers lose access to it when they are not part of the supplier anymore, right? So that is where we feel the advantage of civil society based organizations leading these mechanisms. So even if a worker has left a supplier or that there was retaliation, they can still reach out through these helplines to reach out to the companies, to the suppliers, and then also after a stage, if the supplier is not able to address it, it comes to us. So what I wanted to kind of reiterate is that the effort which we need to put to ensure that workers have access to the right organizations or the right mechanisms, independent of being associated with a supplier is what's going to help them. And then it comes to our notice for sure. We have, a kind of a, how do I call it, a kind of a framework of escalation. And if the supplier is not able to address that, it comes to companies like us, and then we are directly able to manage those cases and remediate. So that's something that we have to do from a remediation perspective. From a prevention perspective, I think we'll have to constantly have our continuous due diligence efforts. I didn't talk about that because due diligence is not just one time. I wanted to reiterate that it needs to be continuous. So we need to have those continuous due diligence efforts to identify these red flags in our supply chain, and then find solutions for that. Where it needs training, we need to provide that. Where it needs to fix systems, we need to fix that, so that retaliation does not become a habit. And I think that's something which is definitely on us. So we kind of work directly, with the supplier at the supplier level to ensure that these red flags are addressed. So these are the two ways I would say that we need to kind of address such situations.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
For the Gulf countries, this is a bit tricky subject matter because some of the companies some of the owners of the companies are maybe relatives of the people in power. So it's really a thing that you cannot face head on. So I think this is where the country of origin government really comes into play. Like they need to mediate this, and then also put some programs in place like for example, for Philippines, there are really now a strong push to have reintegration into the whole cycle of the migration process. So if the foreign workers, the overseas Filipino workers decide already to go home, there are some programs waiting for them to really go back and rebuild their lives back home. But this really needs to be reinforced and put more funding on it. So what I'm saying is, in the case of Qatar, if you file a case, the first step that the government will do is allow two parties to talk to each other and settle it out of court. So that's the first thing. I think that's the most effective way to go about it, because some of the companies, the owners are really related to the people in power, and they can really circumvent the process. And then the next thing is the hardest part that we face right now as part of our work is really supporting those people who really stood up to the companies and filed the case. There are some people who are waiting for the verdict to come, and they are now jobless for the past 14, 16 months. So mostly our help comes into like bringing food to them, like small amount of money to give them, to let them go by day by day. So I think the government of the origin countries can come in to support those kinds of circumstances where they can provide like monetary supports or even some programs to help them rebuild their lives.
Thanks, and actually that's a good reminder of the role of the country of origin as well, and how they can advocate for the protection of their own workers and their own nationals. And the Philippines is particularly good at this, but not all sending countries are equal. And that reminds me of my favorite point, that Filipino migrant workers can vote remotely, and that's the only country in Asia that allows that. So migrant workers are much more of a political bloc, which is also, I think, what we see then translating in greater assistance to the migrant workers.
Yes, because the Filipino overseas workers are a big part of the economy. We send a lot of money back home, so that translates into like voting voice. Like for example, me, I'm only one vote, but I can influence my family who's voting back home, who I help. So the government realizes that.
Maybe we can go to Gladys's question, which is about the agency fees and when they're legally allowed in some countries, and how do we work with that, as well as, I'm just looking at my notes trying to understand them, ensure that there are no violations in the recruitment practices. So how do we work on that? I don't know if anyone...
I think in terms of the excessive fee agency, one in my mind is about how could this victim of excessive fee agencies also have courage to report and to collect the evidence around the excessive fee agency. And this is how the organizing work is part of those chains, the worker to not be exploited through the recruitment agency. So those process, I think this should be an part of the access of remedy, how the worker can be reclaim their money that paid whether to employer or whether to the recruitment agency. This is the one. And the second one, I think the other that we are concerning right now is on the campaigning and promotion for zero-cost recruitment, and how the fair recruitment can be also implemented within the, the guidance for the recruitment agency should be in place. But nevertheless, I think there are certain areas that we are looking at on the reformation of the law within the migration system from origin country and destination country. So for, let's say, Indonesia government has put the zero-cost recruitment under the section of the migrant workers law. But then the other challenge is other destination countries are still allowing the recruitment agency to be paid by the migrant domestic workers. So how we look at these two contextual of the limitation of the law. So I think this is something that we should going on in terms of the advocacy and campaign. Yeah.
I mean, the employer pays principle and the kind of prohibition of recruitment fees and costs, obviously it's quite a patchwork of regulation right now. And I mean, the US clearly says that recruitment fees and costs are an indicator of forced labor, so that's something that most US companies want to avoid at all costs. But then here in our region, many of the governments still permit some charging of costs and fees, although they're usually capped. But then what happens in reality? And so I think that doesn't help, obviously, also in trying to find recruitment agencies that can provide you ethical recruitment, because they might have several business models, one where they charge fees and one where they don't, and can it stay clean? But I don't know if you want to.
I think on the point about law itself, this was also a discussion, around the forum as well, and then there are also discussions outside. What we can clearly see in the landscape is that you have certain countries which do not say anything. Then you have certain countries which says there can be a particular amount of fee. And for us, as a company, our supply chain standards very clearly says that, it upholds the employee-based principle, and also says that workers should never pay recruitment fees. Now, engaging with such countries, with the governments as well as with the suppliers is definitely a challenge. I have colleagues in the room as well. I have colleagues back. And most of them deal with this as a big challenge internally as well as externally. So what we need to do is 2-3 things. One is we continuously find ways to engage with the government through our membership associations, through peer brands. There's been conversations in the last 4 weeks as well around that in a few countries in this region. How do we influence policy? How do we find provisions within the law which can help our stand in terms of the employee-based principle? So that's one thing. The other thing is that practically implementing it. So one side of it is, okay, we have a supplier, we found this fee, and we are working with them to, repay the fees. But also, what do we do about the new recruitments? How do we prevent them in the future? So then we need to work with the supplier to identify the right organizations. We need to sensitize the entire supply chain. And the second question that you also asked about, we need to put strong conditions for ethical recruitment and track them. And also we need to incentivize ethical recruitment agencies by providing opportunities for them to place their workers in the supply chain. So that's the combination effort that we need to do. But the due diligence needs to be continuous. And yes, there are also recruitment agencies which have 2 sections. One, they call it as worker paid fees section, and then there's a section of employer paid fees kind of a model. So we also need to kind of engage with them to demonstrate the importance of EPP and ensure that there is a path for them to access suppliers and get those fees paid. So it's a kind of a collaborative effort there. It's not easy, but that's exactly where we are all headed to.
Can I say something? Okay. Yeah, ethical recruitment is a very expensive endeavor, and I agree with you. Government should support this endeavor one way or another. And then to address her question, they really need to push for bilateral talks between the countries. So it's really the governments here that should push for the non-payment of any fees by the workers, because the workers should not pay anything. But if that is not yet in place, because that takes time, put these companies expose them. Put some grading system online where you can see the agency which are really not doing well when it comes to human rights violations, especially with the fees. Put this in a website, and then so that people can see if these companies are really ethical or not. And then from there on, companies can really choose within themselves on how to go about it. If they are online and everybody can see, and then they will be forced to do it even without the bilateral ties.
Might be a little bit to go touch on the retaliation, especially when we are talking around the migrant domestic worker organizing. What we are focusing, especially in terms of the prevention, is providing a certain training, especially because currently the digital influence is very high dominant, and how it's also influenced in the sense of worker doing organizing in safe mode. So I think one of the federation focus is to provide certain capacity building around how could domestic worker can have access and exchange information, and also including the way how they are doing organizing can be in safe mode. So it's not only for them as a personal, as domestic worker, but it's also for them as a organization, as the union. So these are the, I think, the prevention that we are looking at. And but for so I think the long-term advocacy and process should be government also looking at the ratification for freedom of association for all migrant workers. And I think with this kind of concept of legislation can be turned into national policy framework. I think one of the good experience also in Malaysia when the worker is being fired and even detained by the immigration, the government, and including the employer, and that's how the pathway are possible there when this certain trade union act really looking at the protection for migrant worker, including migrant domestic worker.
Thanks, Maria. Okay, happy to take a few more questions if we have still any burning issues in the audience. If not, we can, we have one here.
Hi everyone, my name is May from Primark, and I want to ask the questions regarding the domestic migrant workers for Vietnam specifically and also in Thailand. So in Vietnam, actually in the manufacturing sector such as garment and footwear, we rarely see international migrant workers, but instead the workforce is more about the domestic migrant workers who move from the other provinces and including ethnic minorities groups. So the issues they usually face is about the pregnancy test that they have to take before the employment, or the limited access to the grievance mechanism and poor living conditions, because actually they don't really stay in the employer provided dormitory, but they are more living in the rented rooms, and also the other limited access to the promotion opportunities. And for Thailand, what I know is that not all the Thai workers are directly employed by the factories, but many Thai workers are also hired through multiple recruitment agencies or subcontractors. So these workers also face similar vulnerabilities as migrant workers, like lack of access to grievance mechanism or paid leave or other workplace benefits. And one common issue is about the non-reimbursement of the recruitment fee or the pre-employment medical checkup costs, even when the law only requires such checks for specific jobs. So my question is that the HRDDD framework usually fail to include these kind of workers in the decision making or the policy design. So without their participation, policy lack the credibility and fail to reflect their life realities. So my question is that any practical steps that the suppliers can take to identify and include HRDDD process of those issues of those workers, and also how can we redesign the grievance mechanism to be accessible and trusted by these internal migrant workers who may face the language barrier, cultural barriers, and also power barriers in speaking up. And finally, how can we build a participatory models where the internal migrant workers, especially the ethnic minorities and the women, to be involved in designing the workplace dialogue structure and workplace policy and also the welfare programs. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, one more from Nurul, and then, okay, we have quick, if they are short ones, there are two. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Pepi, and also for the speakers. I'm Nurul from the ASEAN Australia Counter-Trafficking Program. First, on the issues related to migrant domestic workers, I've been working on this in Hong Kong back then, like 20 years ago. The issue is remained the same, right? So, I mean, like in the context of domestic workers, like what Baria has mentioned related to, not being recognized under the labor laws, so that therefore they are not allowed to form unions, and they are not provided with other entitlement like other workers, including annual leave, maternity leave, and so on. That is still, until today, never changed. In the context of Asia and Pacific, based on my understanding, it's only Hong Kong that recognized domestic workers as workers, so that's why they allow to form union, to to even present in a labor court or labor department when there is a dispute among faced by migrant domestic workers, but not in other country. So this is kind of like something that continues, the gap is continue to happen. But I think in the context of some countries where say paralegal NGOs, pro bono lawyers exist, this can also bring some help. Because in the context of Hong Kong, many cases being brought to labor tribunal, even to the criminal justice process because of the existence of this group, paralegal NGOs, lawyers who are really like helping this community. But in the context of some country, I do understand, like in Qatar, for example, this is almost nearly impossible. So we really rely so much to the consular support. So if the government persons who are posted in that country are really having the heart and really doing their jobs, they probably will be able to help. But otherwise, the problem will be there, and the issues will never be actually solved, or the cases never being helped, and so on. So this is the thing. And in the context of manufacturing factories and kind of that, there's also issues about outsourcings, because I think this also make them become like obstacles for the workers to actually filing complaint and so on, because of the outsourcing mechanism and so on. And another thing is also in the country where the environment is not possible for the workers to actually even form union or even association and so on, formal or informal. Because of the situation of the country, like the political situation, the democracy in the country, that could impact so much too. And there is no way that we can actually really help them. So therefore, I'm looking forward, of course, Pepi, you are not the speaker, on how to leverage the Colombo process, the mechanism that is exists, to ensure that the origin country will not competing to each other to race to the bottom, just deploying the migrants and so on, and without thinking about, ensuring their protection and their rights. And in the context of domestic workers, I wanted to add one more. Very often when the origin country negotiates with the destination country, the destination country will be like, looking at them back, in the origin country, their domestic workers itself is not protected by labor law, right? In the context of Indonesia, Philippines, there is no protection to their local domestic workers. So now they are asking their national migrant workers who are working in a destination country to be protected. So this is really like, the challenge too. Yeah.
Thanks, Nurul. One more, and then we'll close the questions.
Yeah. Hi, this is the cues for the panelists who talked about the ethical trade. I just had only one question. How can businesses balance the initial costs of ethical practices with long-term benefits to ensure both financial sustainability and positive impact on workers?
Okay, thank you. Very good. So on the first question from May, I think if each panelist could just give us one idea, practical step on how suppliers could improve their human rights due diligence or improve the participatory models, if you want to. And then I think, Nurul, the Colombo process question, that might take us into a whole new territory, but I can try to talk about that a little bit. And then the last one, Christian, I think is mainly for you in terms of balancing the costs. So Maria, do you want to start with just thinking about participatory models? Okay, anyone?
I think I just go back to my answers a while ago. So we have to have like a database of all these companies or recruitment agencies who are doing this, and then just put it online and put a grading system on them so that people can see if they are really doing well or they are abiding by the recommendations given by different bodies that regulates them. If not, then they could be, if they cannot be pursued to be filed cases against, it's going to be the image that they project that will be the balancing factor there. So they can really go about to implementing just correct practices. You can see the wonders social media right now have on a lot of things on the society. So I think we can leverage that particular aspects of what we have.
Maybe just to respond a little bit from the first question in relation to the migrant domestic worker in Thailand. Our affiliate name Network of Domestic Worker in Thailand is exists here in Thailand, which their member is local Thai domestic worker and mostly Burmese migrant domestic worker. So in terms of the participatory, I think we look at how the open up of the social dialogue should be inclusive within the representation of the migrant domestic worker themselves. So I think there has been such of conversation in a legislation process in Thailand, where the last year the Thailand government has announced the ministry regulation for protection of domestic worker, which is cover migrant domestic worker inside the benefit. And they are looking at 3 more major area. One is on the limitation of working hours, should not be longer more than 8 hours. And the second one is right to maternity leave within 98 days, and this should be applicable for both local domestic worker and migrant domestic worker. And number 3 is looking at the area of the right to rest day or right to weekly day off. So in terms of how we are looking at the participatory process within the government, and also this should be also look at how the potential of the bringing the private sector like agency recruitment on place when talking about the law development and the implementation. I think this is what I can say related to the Thailand context, and on the domestic worker law and how it should be part of the bargaining position when we want the destination country to also working on the inclusive and recognition. I think I'm also agree with Mbak Nurul that the advocacy should be bridged into the level of country of origin and destination, and this is how the migrant domestic workers should look after the way of strategy in both countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm being told that time is up. So I'm just going to, on the Colombo process, for those of you who are not aware of it, it is a regional consultative platform. IOM is the secretariat, and its very kind of raison d'etre or purpose of being is to bring sending countries together to support them in the way that they are able to protect the migrant workers and kind of bargain for better conditions and for better pay and for kind of policy changes, including reintegration. It's live and well. It is driving this kind of policy conversation, but it is very slow, and of course, that bargaining position between sending countries and receiving countries is still one of imbalance, and so it's not always easy to strengthen some of those protections. But then maybe over to you, Christian, just on the last one, which is
the due diligence as
yeah,
well as the
yeah.
cost. Yeah. So there are 2 points. So I probably, we are over time, so I'm going to try and wrap it up very quickly. So the point around suppliers' due diligence efforts, which was a question coming from me there. I think suppliers, we provide a lot of support to suppliers, but suppliers could probably use a lot of tools available and also get trained in doing, due diligence and continuous due diligence across. For example, kind of almost 1/3 of my team's work is actually supplier training and supplier capacity building, because we have different models, we have tools available, but it's not enough to just putting up the tools, right? So we need to engage with suppliers directly and train them. So we try as much as possible to build capacities through different models. It could be sessions, it could be in-house support and direct supplier support as well. So I would say using the existing technical tools available and utilizing them and getting trained would be the best way the suppliers can do that. The point about ethical trade, I think I want to link that up. It was one of my examples that I had about how we ensure ethical business practices. So this is basically directly linked with the concept of responsible purchasing or responsible business directly. There's no question about it. We have an engagement with the Better Buying Institute, which actually helps us to know what the suppliers think about responsible purchasing. It helps us to, we do it on an annual basis. We understand what our suppliers are thinking, where does the cost lie, and then we bring that back to our business teams to inbuilt in the business practice itself. So we train our business teams. We have a mechanism to track to ensure that responsible purchasing as a concept is inbuilt into the business practice itself. That's the way the cost can be paid. So that's something I'm happy to chat more about it, but I would say it's a direct link with responsible business practices and responsible purchasing.
Thanks. And so with that, I want to close the panel. Thank you very much to the audience for being here Friday morning and asking all the great questions. And thank you to the panelists for your participation and representation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.